first of all, I don't think it's just Australians. I think it's a global problem, and I think that people are looking at their business and trying to understand how does digital apply to us. And I think that's the biggest challenge people face. It's not as simple as in Australia, the context of Australia. I think retailers typically led out of the blocks and said, how do we use digital? Well, we transact through the web. That makes life easy. And Australia's obviously got the logistical problem of being the size of Europe with 20 million people, so retail adoption was a bit slower, and therefore the rest of them, I think, was a bit slower. But other industries, I think, are all over the world looking at the problem, how do we move, not necessarily just digital, but how do we move to a way of engaging with our consumers in the way that they're looking for us to provide the experience? That's the key problem. So yeah, I think that people struggle to map that out and wonder, how do I become relevant to my customers today rather than just selling, advertising? How do I have a conversation? I think there's two things that people underestimate. The first one is the people and process part. People always say, people, technology and processes. The people and process part people most commonly underestimate. And there's no technical solution that's going to work well if you don't get the foundation right. So it's how do we change the way we work as an organization? How do we get our people competent on different ways of having personalized communications and things like that? The success of, or the thing that makes companies successful or differentiates them is they've got that structure and that way of working through in the process and people sense right. I think the second part that people underestimate or they get slightly wrong is that, again, it's not the technology sort of front-end buttons and wizards that makes the difference, it's actually the data that glues it all together. So there are many different ways you can make things easier, for sure, and that's important when it comes to choosing technology that people have to adopt. But again, none of them really work unless you have an underlying connectivity of what data points are going to enable people to make an improved customer experience, which is really what digital transformation is talking about these days. I think the first point has to be, imagine what the end state has to be, and this is not what's my end state technology or my end state sort of widgets. It's how do I want to engage with people in the future as a brand, and that's the goal that has to drive everything. So again, I come back to earlier point. If it's straight retailing, it's very straightforward that you want to be able to transact through the web, but it's not everybody is a retailer, and there are lots of companies and organizations that don't have such a simplified way of driving business metrics. So if it's about having a better experience, then what does that experience look like? And then, of course, it sounds obvious, but then it's about how do we map it out? What's the roadmap? What are the kind of quick win, no lose kind of approaches to do it? And I guess finally, the other most important part, which is, I guess, the greatest challenge, certainly for me in my world, is how do you get the right people with the right skills? So before we go out and hire the latest job title of a marketing technologist or a data scientist, whatever, it's who are the people we've got already, because they're the easiest. Can we retrain them? I read a comment from someone somewhere about how NASA didn't have astronauts when they first went to the moon. They just retrained the top fighter pilots, which I thought was great. It's not my quote, but I'm going to reuse it. So from that perspective, yeah, there's people in the organization, you have to identify them, and if you do have gaps, you've got to go and find the right skills, and of course that's the toughest part.